It was late in the afternoon when the restaurant began to fill up with the usual crowd of business people, escaping their offices for early dinners and private meetings. The place wasn't the kind of spot you found by accident. It had that soft jazz in the background, the smell of roasted garlic and butter in the air, and waiters who seemed to float rather than walk. Every tablecloth was pressed clean, and every glass reflected the warm light above. At the back of the restaurant, near a window that looked out onto the busy Chicago street, stood a young woman in a neat black uniform. Her name was Evelyn Carter. She had been working there for 2 years, and she had mastered the rhythm of the place, the polite smile, the steady tray, the patience required when people forgot she existed until they needed her. Evelyn wasn't the kind of waitress who complained about long hours. She was studying chemistry part-time at a local college, and every tip meant another textbook, another lab fee paid. But sometimes, as she watched customers in tailored suits talk about deals and companies she'd never heard of, she felt a quiet distance, as if she were standing just outside a world she didn't belong to. That evening started like any other. The restaurant buzzed softly, forks clinking, voices low. Evelyn's section was full, but one reservation stood out, a party of 4, booked under the name Hawthorne. The host had whispered it when he saw it on the list. Everyone in the staff knew who that was. Richard Hawthorne, the billionaire investor, founder of Hawthorne Innovations, a man who could turn a small company into a global name overnight. He was known for being sharp, private, and intimidating. Evelyn had seen his face once in a magazine article about business leadership. She remembered reading that he'd started his first company in a garage and sold it for tens of millions before he was 30. Now, as she checked the last setting on the table, her hands felt oddly warm. She wasn't nervous often, but tonight felt different. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the idea that someone like him, someone whose decisions moved entire markets, would sit in the space she'd just wiped clean. When the door opened, a gust of cool air swept through the restaurant. 4 people walked in. Richard Hawthorne led the group, tall, silver hair, the kind of face that looked calm even when thinking about money most people would never imagine. His suit was simple but obviously expensive. Behind him came 2 men in dark suits and a woman holding a sleek leather folder. Evelyn straightened up, greeted them with a practiced smile, and led them to their table. "Good evening, Mr. Hawthorne." "Welcome," she said softly. He nodded politely. "Thank you." They sat down and soon the conversation began, quick, quiet, and full of numbers. Evelyn served water, menus, and bread, keeping her movements light and silent. But even as she stepped away, she caught fragments of their talk. Words like enzyme production, stabilization ratio, and formulation yield drifted across the table. Her ears perked up. She knew those terms. She had spent the past semester buried in notes about chemical stability and synthetic compounds. It was the kind of topic that made her classmates groan. But to Evelyn, it was fascinating. She could still see her professor writing those same equations on the whiteboard. When she returned to the table with wine, she noticed something. One of the men, a younger executive, was sketching an equation on a napkin. He spoke confidently, pointing at it as he explained to Hawthorne and the others. Evelyn slowed just slightly as she poured, her eyes flicking down for a moment. Her heart skipped. The formula wasn't right. It was close, dangerously close. But the proportions were off. The stabilizing compound was written as if the temperature factor didn't matter, but Evelyn knew it did. Without adjusting the ratio, the entire reaction would collapse at normal room temperature. She looked away quickly. What was she doing? Staring at a billionaire's napkin? She finished pouring the wine, smiled politely, and moved back toward the service station. But her thoughts were spinning. That formula could ruin the reaction, she thought. But what if I'm wrong? She glanced over again from across the room. They were still discussing it, and Richard Hawthorne was nodding as if agreeing with his team. It was clear this was important. Maybe the heart of whatever deal they were making. Evelyn felt her stomach twist. She wasn't just curious now. She was uneasy. She couldn't help imagining what would happen if they went ahead with that formula. She knew how a single chemical mistake could cost millions. In her lab, a wrong formula meant a failed experiment. But in their world, it could mean a failed company. She tried to push the thought away. It wasn't her place. She was a waitress, not a scientist, and at least not yet. She didn't want to embarrass herself or risk her job by interrupting a man like that. Still, she couldn't shake it. Her next trip to the table was to refill water. As she leaned in, she heard the younger executive say, "We'll finalize the prototype next week. Once that's stable, the acquisition is a go." Her pulse thumped. Prototype. Acquisition. That meant they were about to invest. If she was right, and she was almost certain she was, that deal would crumble. When she returned to the back counter, another waitress named Paula noticed her distracted face. "You good, Ev?" Paula asked. "Yeah," Evelyn said automatically, then hesitated. "Just thinking." "About the billionaire?" Paula teased. Evelyn managed a small smile but didn't answer. She couldn't tell anyone what was on her mind. It sounded ridiculous. Who would believe a waitress who claimed she spotted a chemical error in a billionaire's meeting notes? Still, her conscience wouldn't let go. She moved through her other tables almost automatically, but her eyes kept flicking back toward the group. By now, their dinner had arrived. Plates of salmon and steak, glasses of wine. The conversation had softened but not stopped. Hawthorne seemed focused, listening as his team laid out details. Occasionally he'd nod or ask a short question, his voice calm and deliberate. Evelyn could almost hear her heart beating in her ears. She didn't know what to do. Every rational part of her told her to stay quiet. But another part, the one that had pushed her to study science in the first place, whispered that she couldn't ignore something like that. As she approached again to check on them, she found herself stopping just short of the table. She looked down at the napkin still lying there, the half-finished formula in blue ink. Her mind went blank for a moment. Then, before she could overthink it, she spoke. "Excuse me, sir," she said softly. The table went silent. 4 pairs of eyes turned toward her. For a split second, she regretted everything. But there was no turning back now. I'm sorry to interrupt," she began, her voice almost a whisper. "But that formula, the one on the napkin, it's missing something." One of the executives frowned. "What?" she swallowed. "The stabilizing agent. The ratio's too high. It'll break down above 25 degrees Celsius." The woman with the folder blinked in surprise. "How do you know that?" Evelyn felt her face warm. "I'm studying chemistry, part-time. I recognized the structure. I could be wrong, of course, but it looked familiar." There was a brief, heavy pause. Then, surprisingly, Richard Hawthorne leaned forward slightly. His expression wasn't annoyed, and it was curious. "Say that again?" he asked. "The ratio," Evelyn said, steadier now. "If you're using that composition, the structure isn't stable. It'll collapse unless you include a secondary stabilizer. I think your numbers assume a controlled lab environment. But if it's meant for production..." She trailed off, realizing how absurd this must sound. Hawthorne studied her for a long moment. The other executives exchanged skeptical looks. Finally, he said quietly, "Interesting." Then he smiled. Not mockingly, but as if he'd just noticed something unexpected. "Thank you, Ms. Carter," she said quickly. "Evelyn Carter." "Well, Ms. Carter," he said, "we'll check that. Appreciate your observation." She nodded, cheeks burning, and retreated before she could say anything else. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached the back station. Paula was watching wide-eyed. "What did you just do?" she hissed. Evelyn forced a small laugh. "Probably ruined my night." But as the minutes passed, she noticed something. The table wasn't talking as confidently anymore. They were looking at the napkin again, murmuring in low tones. One of the men even took out his phone and began typing rapidly, maybe checking something. The rest of the evening moved in a blur. Evelyn kept working, avoiding their table as much as possible. When they finally stood to leave, Hawthorne stopped her as he put on his coat. "Ms. Carter," he said, voice calm but deliberate, "thank you for your attention to detail." She managed a polite smile, unsure what to say. "Of course, sir." He gave a small nod and left, his team following him out into the cool night air. When the door closed, Evelyn exhaled deeply for the first time in hours. She didn't know if she'd just made a fool of herself or if she'd actually helped. Probably the former, she thought. Who was she to correct people like that? But as she cleaned the table, she noticed something. The napkin was still there, folded neatly beside the empty wine glass. And on top of it was a crisp $100 bill. She blinked, unsure if it was a tip or a silent message. She tucked it carefully into her apron and finished wiping down the table. The rest of the night went on as usual, But Evelyn couldn't stop replaying that moment. The whisper, the look on Hawthorne's face, the quiet acknowledgement before he left. She didn't know it yet, but that small act, that soft-spoken courage, would echo far beyond that restaurant. As she walked home later, the cool air brushing her face, she couldn't help smiling a little. Not because of the money or because she'd spoken to a billionaire, but because she'd done something brave, something true to herself. She didn't realize it then, but somewhere in a sleek corporate office that same night, Richard Hawthorne sat in his car reading through the notes his assistant had pulled up. And as he compared the chemical ratios, he frowned. Evelyn Carter had been right, and that single whisper in a quiet restaurant had just changed everything. The next morning came quietly, the city still half asleep under the gray Chicago sky. Evelyn woke before sunrise, the same way she always did on class days. Her alarm buzzed faintly from the nightstand, and for a moment she lay still, staring at the ceiling. Her body felt heavy from the long shift, but her mind wouldn't rest. She kept thinking about last night. The table, the men in suits, and especially that one moment when she'd opened her mouth and spoken. She still couldn't believe she'd done it. She had gone over every possible outcome in her head. Maybe they thought she was rude. Maybe her manager would call her in today and tell her she'd overstepped. Or maybe, and this was the strangest thought of all, maybe she'd actually helped. But how could she know? Evelyn got up, pulled on her jacket, and caught the early bus to campus. The ride was long and quiet. She liked watching the city wake up. Delivery trucks, lights switching from red to green, the smell of fresh coffee floating through the cold air. Her chemistry lecture that morning felt different. Usually she loved the quiet focus of the lab, the sharp smell of alcohol and metal, the clean rhythm of test tubes clinking softly. But today her mind wandered. Every time her professor wrote an equation on the board, she remembered the one on the napkin. By the time class ended, she'd almost convinced herself it was nothing. Maybe she'd misunderstood what she saw. Maybe she'd been wrong. After lunch, she went straight to her shift. The restaurant looked the same. Warm light, clean tables, polite chatter. Her manager, a short, kind woman named Ruth, gave her the usual smile. "Evening, Evelyn." "Busy night ahead." Evelyn nodded. "Got it." She slipped into her rhythm again, trays, glasses, polite greetings. For a while, she almost forgot the whole thing. But later that evening, when she stepped into the staff room to grab her apron, Ruth called out, "Evelyn, you had some interesting guests last night, didn't you?" Evelyn froze. Maybe. Depends which ones." "The Hawthorne group," Ruth said. "Someone from their office called this morning. Wanted to confirm your full name." Evelyn's heart stopped for a moment. "My name? Why?" Ruth shrugged lightly. "Didn't say. Just said it was for a note of appreciation." "Don't worry, nothing bad." Evelyn forced a smile. "Oh, okay, that's nice, I guess." But her hands trembled a little as she tied her apron. The rest of the shift felt long and restless. Every time the door opened, she half expected to see the same faces walk in. But they didn't. Only later that night, when she was leaving, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered softly. "Hello? Is this Evelyn Carter?" The voice was calm, professional. "A woman." "Yes. I'm calling on behalf of Mr. Richard Hawthorne. He asked me to reach you." Evelyn stopped walking. The streetlight flickered above her, and she could hear the faint hum of traffic in the distance. "Oh, yes. Did I do something wrong?" There was a small laugh on the other end. "Not at all. Quite the opposite. Mr. Hawthorne wanted to thank you personally. Would you be available to meet at his office tomorrow morning?" "His office?" she repeated, confused. "Yes, Hawthorne Innovations headquarters. He'd like a brief meeting if possible." Evelyn's heart began to race. I have class in the morning, but maybe afternoon." "Perfect. I'll send you the address and time." When the call ended, she stood still on the sidewalk for a full minute, phone in hand, staring at the night sky. It didn't feel real. Why would a billionaire want to meet her? She didn't sleep much that night. Her mind kept running in circles, fear, excitement, disbelief. She told herself it was probably just a polite thank you. Maybe they'd send her a card. Maybe a small gift. But deep down she felt something bigger stirring. The next day she arrived early. The building was tall, sleek, and made entirely of glass. The kind of place where everything gleamed. The floor, the furniture, even the air seemed cleaner. She felt out of place in her simple blazer, but the receptionist greeted her kindly and led her to a waiting area. After a few minutes, the elevator doors opened and Richard Hawthorne himself stepped out. He looked the same, calm, deliberate, every step measured. When he saw her, he smiled faintly and extended his hand. "Miss Carter, I'm glad you came." "Thank you for inviting me, sir," she said, trying not to sound nervous. He led her into a large office with tall windows overlooking the city. On the desk were papers, a laptop, and, surprisingly, a folded napkin. "The same napkin from the restaurant. Do you recognize this?" he asked, picking it up. Evelyn nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." He unfolded it, showing the scribbled formula. "You were right." She blinked. "I was," he nodded. "Our team ran the test again this morning. The compound broke down exactly as you said. If we'd gone forward with that formula, the production would have failed. You saved us from a massive mistake." Evelyn didn't know what to say. I'm glad it helped, sir." Hawthorne leaned back slightly, studying her with interest. "How did you notice it?" "Most people wouldn't even recognize what that was." "I've been studying chemistry," she said quietly. "Part-time at a local college. I just recognized the structure." There was a pause. Then he said, "And you work nights as a waitress?" "Yes, sir." "It helps with tuition." He nodded thoughtfully. "That explains the calmness under pressure. You handled that situation with confidence most people don't have." Evelyn smiled nervously. "I almost didn't say anything." "Well, I'm glad you did," he said. Then he reached for a folder on his desk and handed it to her. "Inside is something for you, a scholarship fund. Consider it a thank you. No strings attached." Evelyn opened it and gasped softly. It was an official letter, a grant covering the rest of her tuition for the year. "Sir, I can't." "You can," he interrupted gently. "You earned it. People like you, people who see what others miss, are rare. I admire that." Her throat tightened. "Thank you, Mr. Hawthorne. I don't know what to say." "Say you'll keep studying," he said with a small smile. "And maybe one day when you finish, you'll consider joining us here." She nodded slowly, still stunned. After their meeting, she left the building feeling like the world looked brighter somehow. The sky, the wind, even the noise of the streets, and everything felt alive. She wanted to call someone, but she didn't know who. Her parents lived in another state, and most of her classmates barely knew about her night job, so she just walked, smiling to herself. That night when she went to work, Ruth noticed her expression immediately. "Something good happened, huh?" Evelyn laughed softly. "You could say that." Days turned into weeks, and Evelyn threw herself back into her studies. The scholarship changed everything. She didn't have to worry about dropping classes anymore. She could even afford to cut a few shifts and focus on her final projects. But what she didn't expect was what came next. About a month later, she got another call from the same assistant. "Mr. Hawthorne would like to invite you to tour our research facility next week," the voice said. "He thinks you might find it interesting." Evelyn hesitated. "I'd love that." The day of the visit, she wore her best outfit, simple but neat. The facility was unlike anything she'd ever seen. White walls, bright lights, rows of gleaming equipment. She could smell the faint mix of chemicals and clean air. Scientists in lab coats moved around, focused but calm. Hawthorne met her at the entrance, this time dressed casually. "Glad you came," he said warmly. "Thought you'd like to see what your whisper helped save." He led her through the labs, explaining things in a simple way. Evelyn listened, fascinated, asking questions shyly but sincerely. When they reached the section where the corrected formula was being tested, one of the researchers nodded respectfully toward her. "So this is the one who caught it?" Hawthorne smiled. "Yes, Evelyn Carter." The scientist smiled at her. "Good eye. Saved us months of trouble." Evelyn felt her cheeks warm again. "I was lucky, I guess." "Luck favors those who pay attention," Hawthorne said quietly. As they continued the tour, he asked her about her studies, her goals, what she wanted to do after graduation. She told him honestly. She wanted to work in research one day, maybe in pharmaceuticals or sustainability. She wanted to create something that actually helped people. When the visit ended, Hawthorne shook her hand again. "Keep in touch, Evelyn. If you ever need advice or mentorship, my door is open." She thanked him sincerely, not realizing how serious he was. In the weeks that followed, Evelyn's life began to shift quietly. Her professors noticed her growing confidence. Her classmates started asking her for help in labs. Even Ruth at the restaurant said she seemed lighter, happier. But one night, as she was closing up, she found an envelope waiting for her by the register. Her name was written on it neatly. Inside was a letter from Hawthorne's office, an internship offer. Her hand shook as she read it. A paid position for the summer, assisting in the same division that had been testing the formula she'd corrected. Evelyn sat down at a table, staring at the paper. She could hardly believe it. The same restaurant where she'd whispered that small warning had now become the place where her life turned. When she told Ruth the next day, her manager hugged her tight. "You earned this, kid. Don't forget us when you're famous." Evelyn laughed, blinking back tears. Never. The last day she worked there, she stayed a few minutes after closing. She looked around the empty dining room, the tables, the soft lights, the quiet hum of the fridge, and smiled. This place had seen her tired, stressed, hopeful, and now it was letting her go toward something new. That night, as she walked home under the glow of the streetlights, she thought about the strange way life worked. How one small act of courage, one whisper, could open doors she never imagined. And somewhere in a tall office overlooking the city, Richard Hawthorne was smiling too. He'd told his assistant earlier that day, "There's something rare about that girl. She reminds me why I still love this business, because sometimes the right person appears when you least expect it." Evelyn didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. The world she had once watched from a distance was now starting to open for her, one careful step at a time, and all because one night, she trusted her voice. The first morning of Evelyn's internship felt like standing at the edge of a brand new world. She woke before her alarm. The sky still gray outside her small apartment window. Her clothes were already laid out neatly. A plain white blouse, black slacks, and the same pair of polished shoes she'd worn to her scholarship meeting. She stood in front of the mirror for a moment, staring at her reflection. "You can do this," she whispered to herself. "You belong here." The bus ride to the city felt different this time. She wasn't just passing by the tall glass buildings anymore. She was walking into one of them. At the reception desk of Hawthorne Innovations, the same woman who'd called her weeks ago smiled warmly. "Welcome back, Evelyn. You're with the research division, right?" "Yes," Evelyn said, trying to sound confident. The woman handed her a visitor badge and gestured toward the elevators. "Floor 12. Someone from the lab will meet you there." The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, revealing bright hallways lined with glass. The hum of machines and soft beeping of computers filled the air. She could smell a faint mix of disinfectant and metal, the clean, cold scent of science. A man in a white lab coat approached her. He looked to be in his late 30s, with kind eyes behind his glasses. "You must be Evelyn Carter," he said, shaking her hand. "I'm Dr. Patel. Welcome to the research team." "Thank you," she said, feeling both nervous and excited. He led her into the lab, a wide, bright space with tables full of equipment, samples, and screens filled with numbers she half understood. Several researchers were already at work, some running experiments, others discussing results in low voices. Dr. Patel handed her a small notebook and an ID badge. "You'll be shadowing me for the first few weeks," he explained. "Don't worry, we'll start simple. You'll help with documenting results, prepping samples, maybe a bit of data checking once you get comfortable." Evelyn nodded quickly. Got it, but inside her heart was racing. She didn't want to just help. She wanted to learn everything, every process, every reason behind what they did. Her first few days passed in a blur of observation and note-taking. She followed Dr. Patel closely, watching how he handled the delicate instruments and how carefully he measured everything. The precision amazed her. One small mistake could ruin an entire experiment. What surprised her most was how kind everyone was. They didn't treat her like an outsider. A few even remembered hearing her story, how she'd spotted the formula error months ago. One of the senior chemists, a calm woman named Dr. Lang, smiled at her one afternoon and said, "That whisper saved us a headache. You've got a good eye. Keep it sharp." Evelyn smiled shyly, her cheeks warm. Compliments like that meant more to her than she could say. Still, it wasn't easy. Some nights she stayed up late reviewing chemistry notes, afraid of looking unprepared. She made mistakes. Spilled a small sample once, misread a label another time, but everyone was patient. And slowly, she began to settle in. A few weeks later, Dr. Patel called her over. Evelyn, we're testing a new stabilizing compound next week. It's similar to the one you pointed out before. Want to help with the prep? Her eyes widened. Really? Yes, of course, he smiled. Good. You've earned it. The next few days were the most exciting she'd had in a long time. She helped measure compounds, recorded temperatures, and even got to handle small reactions under supervision. Every small success felt like a victory, but the real test came unexpectedly. One afternoon, Dr. Patel was called into a meeting, leaving Evelyn to record results from a trial. It was simple. Just document the reaction temperatures every 5 minutes and report if anything unusual happened. For the first hour, everything was smooth. The numbers stayed consistent, the mixture looked stable, but then, as she watched the solution closely, she noticed something. A faint discoloration at the edges of the beaker. It was subtle, but definitely there. Her stomach tightened. That wasn't supposed to happen. She checked the notes. The formula was meant to remain clear until the compound was neutralized. A change in color meant the reaction was starting to decay. Something was off. Evelyn glanced around the lab. Most of the team had stepped out for a meeting. She could wait until they returned, or she could act now. She bit her lip, thinking. Then she remembered that night at the restaurant. How she'd almost stayed silent then, too. She took a deep breath, turned off the heating element, and began cooling the mixture slowly with a fan. When Dr. Patel returned 20 minutes later, she was still at the station, carefully stabilizing the sample. He looked at the screen, then at her. What happened? The reaction started to turn color, she explained quickly. It was breaking down. I shut off the heat before it passed the threshold. He checked the data logs and nodded slowly. Good catch. If that had continued, we'd have lost the sample, and possibly the equipment. That was fast thinking, Evelyn. She exhaled, relief washing over her. I just didn't want to take chances. That's how good scientists think, he said with a small smile. Well done. Later that evening, as she packed her bag, Dr. Lang stopped by her desk. Heard you caught another one today, she said with a grin. Seems like a pattern. Evelyn laughed softly. Just paying attention, I guess. Well, keep doing that. Attention to detail will take you far here. That night when she got home, she couldn't stop smiling. She called her mother for the first time in weeks and told her about the internship. Her mother's voice was full of pride. You see, honey, you were meant for this. Hard work always finds its way back. Evelyn held on to those words. As summer went on, she grew more confident. She started suggesting small ideas during meetings. Alternate methods, new ratios, even tweaks in procedure. Not all of them were used, but the fact that people listened amazed her. One afternoon, while the team was testing a new batch, the lab door opened and everyone fell quiet. It was Richard Hawthorne. He rarely visited the labs directly, but when he did, it meant something important. He walked in calmly, nodding to a few people, and then his eyes landed on Evelyn. Ah, our favorite intern, he said warmly. How's the experience treating you? She smiled nervously. Better than I ever imagined, sir, he chuckled. Good. Dr. Patel tells me you've been saving us trouble again. She felt her cheeks warm. Just doing my job. He looked around the lab, then said quietly, Do you know what I like about science, Ms. Carter? It doesn't care where you come from. It only cares if you're right. That's what makes it beautiful. Evelyn nodded. That's what I love about it too, sir. He gave her an approving look. Keep that mindset. Curiosity and courage. Those are the best tools you can have. When he left, Dr. Patel turned to her with a smile. You've made quite the impression. The days that followed were some of the happiest of her life. The work was challenging but fulfilling. For the first time, she felt she wasn't just working for something, she was part of something. But one Friday evening, as the team prepared for a presentation, a sudden issue came up. A critical batch they'd been developing for weeks had shown unstable results. If they couldn't fix it, the project would be delayed, and the entire deal connected to it might fall apart. The atmosphere turned tense. Everyone stayed late, running tests and reviewing data. Evelyn sat quietly at her station, going over the readings. Then something caught her eye. A small pattern in the data that others had missed. She hesitated. Should she say something again? Dr. Patel was pacing, muttering about deadlines. Dr. Lang was adjusting charts. The air felt thick with pressure. Evelyn took a deep breath and spoke up. Excuse me, she said softly. I think the issue might be in the temperature control logs. Everyone looked up. She pointed to the screen. The fluctuations here, they match the instability. It's not the compound. It's the storage temperature. The sensors are off by 2 degrees. There was silence for a moment. Then Dr. Patel checked the logs himself. His eyes widened. She's right. Dr. Lang quickly adjusted the calibration. Within minutes, the readings began to stabilize. The room filled with relieved laughter. Dr. Patel turned to Evelyn, grinning. You just saved us again. She laughed softly, her face glowing. Guess I'm getting used to it. That night, as they packed up, she stood by the window of the lab, looking out at the city lights. The skyline shimmered against the dark sky, and for the first time, she felt like she belonged there, not as an outsider, but as part of the story. When she left, she passed by the lobby where Richard Hawthorne happened to be speaking with an investor. He noticed her and gave a small nod. As she walked past, she heard him say quietly to the man beside him, "That's Evelyn Carter, the one I told you about. Bright future ahead." The words lingered in her mind the whole ride home. She didn't know where life would take her next, but she knew this much. She had stepped into a world that once seemed unreachable. And she had done it by staying true to herself, by trusting her instincts, and by never letting fear silence her again. The whisper that started everything had turned into a steady, confident voice, and it was only getting stronger. Evelyn's internship came to an end faster than she expected. By the time the last week arrived, she couldn't believe how much she had learned. The lab no longer felt like a strange new world. It felt like home, a place where her ideas mattered, where she was seen not as a waitress but as someone with potential. On her final day, the research team gathered around to thank her. Dr. Patel handed her a small card signed by everyone. Inside was a handwritten note that said, "Curiosity is your greatest strength. Keep asking questions." She smiled and thanked everyone, feeling a quiet ache in her chest. She didn't want to leave. As she packed her things, Dr. Patel said, "You've done an amazing job here, Evelyn. I have no doubt we'll see you again. Don't stop now." "I won't," she said softly, and she meant it. That evening, as she left the building, she noticed the city lights reflecting off the glass doors. It was hard to believe that just months ago she was a waitress watching people like this walk past her tables. Life could change so quickly, with a whisper, a little courage, and a lot of heart. A few days later, she received an email from Hawthorne Innovations. It wasn't from the lab. It was from Richard Hawthorne's office. He wanted to meet her again. The next afternoon, she sat across from him in his large office, sunlight streaming through the windows. "How was the internship?" he asked. "It was amazing, sir," she said honestly. "I learned more than I could have imagined." He nodded. "Good. I've been keeping an eye on your progress. Everyone had good things to say about you?" Evelyn blushed slightly. "I'm grateful for the chance you gave me." He smiled. "You earned it. Which is why I have another offer for you. We'd like you to come back, this time as a junior research assistant, full-time. You'd be working under Dr. Patel again." Her eyes widened. "Are you serious?" "Completely," he said. "Think of it as the next step. You've already proven your value here. Now let's see what you can do when you're part of the team for real." Evelyn could hardly find words. "Thank you, sir. I'd love to." "Good," he said, leaning back with a small, satisfied smile. "Welcome aboard." When she walked out of that building, she wanted to cry and laugh all at once. She had a real job, in the same place where she'd once just been a curious voice in the background. The first few months in her new role were challenging but exciting. She was now responsible for handling her own small experiments and working closely with other researchers. Her days were long, sometimes exhausting, but she loved every minute. Dr. Patel gave her more freedom now. "You've earned my trust," he said one afternoon as she adjusted samples on the lab table. "Don't be afraid to take the lead when you see something needs doing." She nodded. "Thank you, sir." Her confidence grew. She became known for her precision and quiet determination. People often came to her for double-checking calculations or reviewing tricky formulas. Her reputation spread quietly, the young woman with sharp eyes who caught details others missed. One day, Hawthorne called for a company-wide meeting. Everyone gathered in the large conference hall, curious about the announcement. When he walked on stage, the room fell silent. He spoke about a new project, A groundbreaking compound that could revolutionize medical treatment if it worked. "We're taking a bold step," he said. "It will require every ounce of our talent, patience, and integrity." The project was called Helix X. It would be the company's most ambitious experiment yet, and Evelyn was assigned to the data analysis team. She couldn't believe it. From the very first day, she sensed this was different. There was more secrecy, more pressure. Everyone worked long hours, and the higher-ups visited the lab more often than usual. Dr. Lang, who was leading the project, pulled Evelyn aside one afternoon. "This formula is delicate. Small mistakes could set us back months. I need your full attention." "You'll have it," Evelyn promised. Weeks passed and the project moved forward, though not without trouble. The early trials weren't producing the expected results. Something was off, but no one could figure out what. The tension in the lab grew. Late one night, long after most people had gone home, Evelyn stayed behind to review the latest data logs. She couldn't shake the feeling that something didn't add up. She pulled up the readings, cross-referenced them with older files, and froze. The data had been altered. At first, she thought she made a mistake, but the timestamps didn't lie. Some results had been changed, adjusted just enough to make the trials look successful. Her heart pounded. She checked the backup records on the secure drive, and sure enough, the original data showed unstable reactions. Someone had falsified the numbers. She sat back in her chair, her mind racing. This wasn't a simple error. This was deliberate. The next morning, she went straight to Dr. Patel. "Sir, can I show you something?" she said quietly. He looked at the screen, his brow furrowing as he scrolled through the logs. After a long pause, he sighed heavily. "You're right. Someone's been editing the results. What should we do?" Evelyn asked. He thought for a moment. "We'll take it to Dr. Lang first. Let her decide." But when they showed her, Dr. Lang's reaction surprised them both. Her face tightened slightly. "Leave this with me," she said after a moment. "I'll handle it." Dr. Patel hesitated. "This could be serious, Doctor." "We can't." "I said I'll handle it," she repeated firmly. "Let's not jump to conclusions." Evelyn didn't like the tone in her voice. Something about it felt uneasy. Over the next few days, nothing happened. The altered data remained in the system, and no investigation was announced. It was as if nothing had ever been said. Evelyn felt a growing knot in her stomach. One night, she stayed late again and overheard two senior team members talking quietly near the coffee machine. "The board wants results," one whispered. "Lang's doing what she has to." "Yeah, but falsifying data, that's risky. Better than losing funding." Evelyn's chest tightened. She couldn't believe it. The company that had given her a chance and the place she admired was hiding the truth. She barely slept that night. Her mind kept circling one question. What would Hawthorne think if he knew? By morning, she'd made up her mind. She printed out the original data logs and took them straight to his office. She waited nervously in the reception area until his assistant ushered her in. When she stepped inside, he looked up from his desk, surprised but not displeased. "Evelyn, what brings you here?" She hesitated, then spoke carefully. "Sir, there's something wrong with the Helix X project. I found data that was changed. The reports aren't accurate." He frowned slightly. "Changed?" "Yes, sir. The reaction logs were modified to make it look stable, but the original files show instability. I thought you should know." He stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he stood and walked to the window, hands in his pockets. Finally, he said quietly, "You realize this could be serious?" "I know," she said softly, "but I couldn't ignore it." He turned back toward her, his eyes sharp but not angry. "You did the right thing. Leave this with me. And, Evelyn, don't mention this to anyone else for now." She nodded. "Yes, sir." 2 days later, a confidential review was launched. Dr. Lang resigned suddenly, citing personal reasons. Within a week, Hawthorne addressed the research team personally. "I want every person in this company to remember," he said, his voice firm. "Truth is our foundation. Without it, science becomes a lie. One of you reminded me of that, by speaking up when it wasn't easy. That's the kind of integrity that keeps us strong." Evelyn sat quietly at the back of the room, her heart full. He didn't say her name, but she didn't need him to. After the meeting, he found her in the hallway. "You've done something important, Evelyn," he said. That took courage. "Not everyone would have risked their position for the truth. I just wanted to do what was right." she said softly. That's exactly why you'll go far here, he replied. From that day on, things changed again. People looked at her differently, not with envy but with respect. She became a symbol of honesty in the company, though she never boasted about it. She just kept working hard, quietly and steadily like always. Weeks later, Hawthorne invited her to lunch. It wasn't in a fancy restaurant this time. They ate in the company cafeteria side by side like colleagues. I built this company from nothing, he said as he stirred his coffee. But I've made mistakes. I've seen people chase success and forget why they started. What you did reminded me what matters. She smiled gently. You gave me my chance. I just wanted to protect what this place stands for. He nodded. Then you already understand more than most. When lunch ended, he stood and said, Keep that compass steady, Evelyn. It'll guide you farther than you think. As she walked back to the lab, she thought about how strange life could be, how every choice built on the last. First the whisper, then the internship. Now this. Each step had come with fear, but also with faith that doing the right thing mattered. That night, as she stood by the window of her apartment watching the city lights flicker, she smiled softly. The journey wasn't over, not even close, but for the first time, she truly believed she could handle whatever came next. She was no longer just the waitress who once corrected a billionaire. She was a scientist, a truth seeker, and someone who had earned her place through courage, not connections. And though she didn't know it yet, her story was far from finished. The next challenge and the next turning point on it was already waiting beyond the horizon. Years passed, but Evelyn never forgot how everything began. Life had changed in ways she could never have imagined. The young woman who once served coffee in a restaurant was now leading her own research team at Hawthorne Innovations. Her small desk had turned into an office with glass walls, and her name was printed neatly on the door. But success hadn't changed her much. She still wore the same modest smile, still arrived early every morning, and still spoke to everyone, from the janitors to the executives, with kindness. People in the company respected her not just for her intelligence, but for her humility. Her life had become a quiet example of how far courage and honesty could go. Yet in her heart, she knew she still had more to do. The Helix X project had taught her something deep, that science wasn't just about discovery, but about responsibility. Every formula carried consequences, and every breakthrough could change lives for better or worse. One evening, long after most of the lab had gone home, she sat at her desk staring at a stack of notes. Her mind drifted back to the restaurant, that night years ago when she saw a mistake in a stranger's formula and decided to speak up. That whisper had changed everything. Now, she was the one people came to for advice. She smiled at the thought. Life had a strange way of circling back. Not long after, Richard Hawthorne invited her to a private meeting. She hadn't seen him in a few months. He had been traveling across countries, negotiating partnerships and speaking at global conferences. But whenever he was in town, he always found time to check on her work. When she entered his office, he greeted her warmly. Evelyn, he said, standing to shake her hand. It's good to see you. It's good to see you too, sir, she replied. He gestured for her to sit. You've built quite a reputation here. Your team's report on the enzyme-based energy cells caught my attention. That's groundbreaking work. Thank you, she said a little shyly. We're still improving the design, but I believe we're getting close to something stable and affordable. He smiled. That's what I like about you. You don't chase the spotlight. You chase the solution. She looked down, grateful but humble. I just want to make things that matter. He studied her quietly for a moment, then said, Do you know what I remember most about that night in the restaurant? She shook her head. It wasn't the formula, he said softly. It was how certain you were, and yet how polite. You didn't try to prove me wrong. You just wanted to help. That's rare, Evelyn. People who speak up usually do it to show off. You did it to protect the truth. His words touched her deeply. I guess I just couldn't stay quiet. He nodded. And that's why you're here. But I think you're ready for something bigger. She blinked, unsure what he meant. He leaned forward. I'm planning to step back from the company in a few years. I want new minds, people with integrity to take the reins. I've been watching you closely, and I believe you're one of those people. Her eyes widened. Me? Yes, you, he said firmly. You have the heart for it. Leadership isn't about control. It's about care. And you care more than most. She didn't know what to say. The thought of leading such a large company felt overwhelming. I don't think I'm ready for that. He smiled gently. You said the same thing about joining the lab. And look at you now. They both laughed softly. After the meeting, Evelyn walked out into the cool evening air, feeling both inspired and uncertain. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew she wanted to use her position to make a difference. Months went by, and her project advanced faster than anyone expected. The enzyme-based energy cells, nicknamed Lightcore, began to show real promise. Unlike traditional batteries, they used biodegradable materials and produced zero toxic waste. If successful, it could change the world. But big dreams often come with big challenges. Investors started showing interest, and soon there were offers. Huge ones. Some companies wanted to buy the patent outright. Others wanted to partner, but on conditions that would make the product expensive and out of reach for poorer communities. Evelyn felt torn. She didn't want her work to become just another luxury for the wealthy. She wanted it to help schools, villages, and small hospitals, places where electricity was still unreliable. When she shared her concerns with her team, some agreed, but others argued that accepting one of the big offers would secure their future. It's business, one colleague said. You can't change the world if you don't have funding. Evelyn understood, but something inside her refused to give up her principles. She had seen what greed could do. She couldn't let it happen again. After several restless nights, she requested another meeting with Hawthorne. When she explained her hesitation, he listened quietly. When she finished, he said, You know, years ago I would have told you to take the biggest deal. But now, I think you already know what's right, she nodded. I just don't want to lose the purpose behind the science. He smiled faintly. Then don't. Build your own company. Keep the patent under your name, find honest investors, and do it your way. Her eyes widened. Start my own company? Yes, he said. You've earned the knowledge and the credibility. You don't need to wait for permission anymore. The thought scared her, but it also lit a fire inside her. Over the next few months, she began sketching out her vision. She called it Lumicore, a small startup focused on clean, affordable energy. To her surprise, Hawthorne supported her fully. He even invested part of his personal funds to help her launch. It's not a gift, he said when she thanked him. It's a partnership. You're the future, Evelyn. Don't ever forget that. Setting up the company wasn't easy. She faced setbacks, rejections, and endless paperwork. Some days she questioned if she had made the right choice. But every time she felt doubt creeping in, she remembered where she started, a waitress who spoke up because something didn't feel right. That memory reminded her that courage had brought her this far. A year later, Lumicore officially launched its first product, a small, palm-sized power cell that could light up a home for 48 hours using renewable enzymes. The design was simple but revolutionary. It was affordable, sustainable, and safe. News spread quickly. Reporters began calling her the scientist who gave light to the people. But she stayed grounded. At the launch event, she stood on stage, looking out at the crowd of journalists, investors, and young scientists. Hawthorne sat in the front row, smiling proudly. When she began to speak, her voice trembled at first, but soon found its rhythm. I was once a waitress, she said, and I thought my place was just to serve others quietly. But one night I learned that sometimes even a small voice can change a big story. That whisper led me here, not because I was special, but because I chose to care. The audience listened in silence. I want every young person out there to remember, she continued, that your background doesn't define your limit. What matters is what you do when you see something wrong, or when you believe something can be better. The crowd erupted in applause. After the event, Hawthorne approached her. That was perfect, he said. You spoke from your heart, she smiled. You taught me that, sir, he chuckled. No, you taught me something, and that the best leaders are the ones who listen. They stood together for a while, watching people take photos and shake hands. It was a quiet, full-circle moment. Two lives that had crossed by chance and changed each other forever. Later that night, after everyone had gone, Evelyn sat alone in the small office of her new company. The lights were dim, and the city outside shimmered with movement. She opened her old notebook, the one she had used during her waitressing days to jot down formulas and dreams. Flipping through the pages, she saw messy equations, coffee stains, and faint doodles. It felt like another lifetime. On the last page, she wrote a few simple words. Never stop asking. Never stop caring. She closed the notebook and smiled. Outside, a gentle breeze carried the sound of the city. Car horns, laughter, and life. She leaned back in her chair and let out a long, peaceful sigh. For the first time in years, she didn't feel uncertain. She didn't feel small, she felt whole. Somewhere deep down, she knew this wasn't just her story anymore. It was a story for anyone who had ever been overlooked, anyone who had ever doubted their worth, and anyone who believed that honesty and kindness still mattered in a world chasing power. And as the night deepened, she thought again of that moment in the restaurant, of the whisper that had started it all. It was never about correcting a billionaire. It was about believing that truth, no matter how softly spoken, could still be heard.